The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Hey friends, Jonathan Rogers here. I know a lot of you love Flannery O'Connor, and I think a lot of you love writing. So you'll be glad to know that on June 4th, I'm starting a 6-week online course called Writing with Flannery O'Connor. Each week, we're going to read one of O'Connor's short stories and one of her essays on writing. On Thursdays, I'll give a live lecture. There's going to be writing exercises, online discussion, and lots of opportunities to connect with other writers. Find out more at thehabit.co/Flannery. Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Leif Enger wrote the novels Peace Like a River, So Brave, Young, and Handsome, and most recently, Virgil Wander. He's a lifelong Minnesotan, and his love of the people and the landscapes of the upper Midwest is palpable in his writing, and contagious, if you'll forgive the untimely metaphor. When I called Leif Enger to record this episode, we just started talking, and he had so much great stuff to say that I couldn't bring myself to interrupt him for my usual introduction. So let me say now what I neglected to say then. Leif Enger, thank you for making time to be on the Habit Podcast.
The thing that I love about the books that I love is that they are generally full of people I like in a place I don't want to leave. And so whenever I think about, I like a plot. I mean, you've got to have a plot. But the plot is never what keeps me reading. The characters keep me reading, and the place keeps me reading. And there is something about, all the places I have written about in books tend to be here in the Midwest, and they tend to be places that when I close my eyes, that's just where I am. The North Shore of Lake Superior is one of these just almost embarrassingly lovely places. It's so pretty that there are places on the shore where it hurts your eyes. It's just, it's too much. It's just concentrated beauty. It's like if you drove the E21, if you drove that seaside highway down the Pacific Coast Highway, which goes for hundreds of miles from Northern California to Southern California, and you took all the beauty that's there, and it is profligate, and then you condensed that down into, a couple hundred miles. Boom, that's the North Shore. And yet you've got all of these towns where it's almost impossible to make a living, and has been for decades. I mean, it's this boom and bust mining economy and shipping economy. And you want so badly for the people there to be able to make it. And yet, most of the time, it's really hard to do. So that's a good inner tension, I think. but place for me is just is a real driver of what makes a good novel.
Do you? You said you love place, and you write about places in the Midwest. What about talk to me about reading places that aren't in the Midwest? I mean, I guess. I love reading books that introduce me to places that I've never thought I'd be interested in. I get like your book, right? I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Dakotas except when I read Peace Like a River, and
right. Yeah,
and the North Shore of Lake Superior. I didn't know it was called the North Shore because it's not actually it's the North Shore of. When you say the North Shore, it's really the southern part of the southern edge of Lake Superior, right?
The honest to goodness North Shore is in Ontario.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right, but here in Minnesota, we've got what we call the North Shore, and as opposed to what they have in Wisconsin, which is the South Shore.
Oh.
And so that's sort of the dividing line is, in Duluth, it turns from the North Shore into the South Shore as you drive east into Wisconsin. And they have very different characters, I mean, the South Shore tends to be sand beaches, and the North Shore is just rocky outcroppings and cliffs and drama. And they both just have their charms. But yeah, reading is just a wonderful way to travel and to start to fall in love with different places. When I was doing research for Virgil, I just sort of fell in love with surfing culture. I read all kinds of books that were set in the Hawaiian Islands. And
did you say surfing culture?
Surfing culture, yeah. Because there's a little surf culture that's grown up here in Lake Superior. These crazy individuals in wetsuits go out in November when the gales are high, and the waves come in, and they're 12-foot waves that come in and crash on the beaches, and these mostly guys, but also a few women, are out there in their wetsuits with their surfboards, and there's ice hanging off of their beards, and they're
even the women,
they're out of their and they're completely out of their minds, and it's totally wonderful.
Oh, wow.
So I knew that I needed to have a surfer in the book, and so I was reading about just sort of surf culture. Mm-hmm. And I began to really fall for the South Pacific where it all began. And now I know I'm going to have to go and visit. When all this craziness is over and we can travel again, I'm definitely going to the South Pacific. I want to see some real surf culture that doesn't involve ice. I think that's what you're talking about, is just the ability to open some pages and just fall into a different place that then you are loath to leave. It's what so much Southern literature has going for it, is that that just sense of slumpiness and place. There's a great book by Larry Mercury that he wrote in about 1962 called "All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers." I
don't know that book.
And isn't that a good book?
No, I said I don't know that book. I've never read it.
Oh, you don't know that book? I thought you said you loved that book. I think you might love it if you read it. It's not one of his better-known books. It's pre-Lonesome Dove, He wasn't yet a household name, at least among writers. And in this book, it's set in Houston, where this young writer is a student at Rice University, and then he gets fed up with school and he leaves. He goes to California. He has a little adventure. Eventually, he drives back to Houston, but his love of Houston is so beautifully explained, and you start to understand the sort of the kind of lovely oppressiveness of the air, and how the whole city is low, and if there's rain, every parking lot is a foot underwater, and yet that whole kind of slumpy atmosphere of it, he just adores, and it feels like Houston is his best friend. And before he leaves, he takes a long walk through the streets of Houston, and the streetlights are on, and there's this kind of nice, cloying, stumpy smell. And he's like, "Man, Houston's my best friend. What am I going to do when I'm not in Houston anymore?" And it's really this. I've only passed through Houston, but now I want to go and spend a little time.
Yeah.
That's books can do that for us in a way that maybe only the really best movies can also do. And books are powerful that way.
Well, I do think books have a power to make us. I mean, you're talking about Houston is not the kind of place that people. I mean, Houston has kind of gets a bad rap. People don't talk about how much they love Houston. They talk about how humid it is, and they talk about how bad the traffic is. And
Right.
I love books that make me love places that I wouldn't know to love. I mean, we talked about Bruce Springsteen a minute ago, and how he makes New Jersey seem like it would be so great to be from New Jersey. I just,
Right.
I would love, when I listen to Bruce Springsteen, I think, boy, what a place New Jersey must be. And
and so did you ever watch Anthony Bourdain?
No, I didn't watch
his series. That's the feeling you get from a lot of his stuff. And speaking of New Jersey, and speaking of Houston and many other places, he had a way of going and getting in and showing you a gritty side of a place that absolutely made you fall in love with it. I think that was his magic as well.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm very aware of in your work is a sense of delight. And again, looking at a place like what's the name of the town in Virgil Wander? Greenstone.
Greenstone. Yeah.
Looking at this place where that seems unlovely or undelightful, at least the town itself. I know the surroundings are beautiful, and finding delight in that, and that just seems like an important engine for your work, and not just yours, but writing more broadly.
I think it really is. I think you can tell when a writer is working with an accessibility or an openness to delight, and maybe when they aren't. And I think, I don't always succeed in it myself, but mostly what I write for is to gain access to that sense. Look, there's just as an example, sort of how it transitions from life into work. Robin and I take long walks, like I was mentioning before, through Duluth, and a few blocks from our house, there's a beautiful sort of small wilderness, a park called Tisher, and there's a creek that runs through it, a beautiful, swift running creek that runs all year, Tisher Creek. It's very pretty, and there's a nice gravel path that runs along beside it, and there are bridges that go over it. And there's a fox that must live nearby. I've seen this fox a few times, and foxes are clever. But this one does something that I've never seen before, which is he hangs around this one part of the creek where there's a backwater, and a thirsty creature can go down and drink easily. And if you go down there, there's a little wet sand, and there's mud that never really dries, and you can see the tracks of all kinds of animals there, deer and house cats and dogs and large birds and raccoons. But this fox that I keep seeing leaves no tracks. So two or three times I've seen him down there, standing by the water, getting a drink, looking around, and I wait until he's gone, and then I go down to find his tracks, because I like that language of animal tracks. And there just aren't any fox tracks down there. Somehow this fox, who is as real as you and me, has figured out how not to leave tracks. So I have this picture in my head of a fox drifting along the shore with his feet like a couple inches off the ground. and so delight, it's usually there if you are willing to see it, and it's usually free. So I think this connects to what you kind of mentioned in your email, which was the state of the kind of the givenness of the world around us, which, as I understand it, just means the world as it is, instead of maybe what we wish it was. But I think delight is that door that gives us both at the same time.
Gives you both what at the same time?
see both the world as it is and a little bit extra, just a little extra. So the fox is there, but the fox is also drifting off the ground. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I think so.
It's like the world is solid and the world is corporeal, but it's also ethereal and delightful.
Yeah.
There's, I guess maybe there's an imagination or a childlikeness to seeing the world that way. But that's really the only reason I write, is because I desperately need to be able to see both of those things. And writing is the only way I have found to do it consistently.
Sounds like going on walks and picnics is another way you get at delight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What are some other ways that you find delight?
Oh, well, I read a lot of books.
Yeah.
Writers do it for me on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
I sometimes I read old favorites. Often I look for new favorites. I think that's easier to do with books than it is with music. With music, I always find myself drifting back to tastes I acquired when I was in my 20s or teens. I'm sure this is why oldies stations are so popular. Throw Tom Petty at me and I'm just a pile of mush.
Yeah, I know that's funny. I was just thinking about Tom Petty when you said that. I don't guess I will ever outgrow Tom Petty.
I don't think I will either. I mean, maybe my favorite songwriter. I adore that music. Mm-hmm. Whereas with books, I step back and read Charles Portis on a regular basis. I step back and read Larry McMurtry and Ann Tyler and so many books that I read when I was younger. Mm-hmm. But somehow with books, I'm also always looking for the next one that I know is going to be a favorite. So last year I read a terrific book by Megan Hunter. This young writer, I've never met her. And she wrote a slim little novel called The End We Start From, which reads like a long poem. It's a short novel. You can read it in one sitting. And it sounds like such a downer, but I was glued to it. It was mesmerizing. It felt like an epic poem. It felt like I was reading Homer. And so
really?
I can't wait for her to write more books because I want to read them. I want to fall into that spell. And falling under a spell is, that's a pool of light wherever you find it.
Yeah. I've heard you say something along the lines of, the way you know what to write is what it is that you would like to read. Which is, another reason for a writer to read. Seems to me the only reliable way of knowing what to write next, and the only way to know what kind of, if you're trying to write funny, all you've got is what's funny to you, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's incredibly subjective, and it's I don't know. I don't know how well. I mean, I don't think I could ever probably just take the assignment of saying, okay, write a book that will be comforting to people right now.
Yeah.
Well, I have no idea. All I know is what I desperately want to read right now.
Yeah.
And I've just got to be willing to roll with where the story wants to go. Mm-hmm. Another thing I sort of admire is when a writer can map something out and say, here's where this, man, I wish I could do that. Maybe it wouldn't take me so long to write books. If I could write an outline and then stick to the outline instead of abandoning it after 8 pages.
So do you write outlines that you then abandon, or you just don't write outlines?
No, I write them, but I never stick to them,
Right. Yeah.
I always have an outline because a story appears with a certain kind of wholeness to it. Mm-hmm. At least, so far, that is the way it has happened.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll be able to
Yeah.
Do it differently. But right now, I'm just doing what I have. Here's an example. Okay, book I'm working on right now. I'm about halfway done, and my narrator, whose name is Rainier, has docked his old boat in a little town of the Canadian shore of Lake Superior. And what can I say about Rainier? I don't want to over-explain it, so I'm not going to tell you about the mission that he is on.
Okay.
But he docks in this town to repair his little sailboat after a storm. And so he's looking around for parts, and he meets this fellow who happens to be a doctor. Now, when I started writing about the doctor, I thought he was just there to take care of a cut that Rainier got on his eye during the storm on Lake Superior, because he needs to see a doctor. And I thought, well, here's the role for this guy to play. But then when I started to write about this doctor, it turned out that he's kind of an interesting character. He's got sort of troublesome diction, and he's got terrible eyes, and he's kind of troubled and heartbroken about a situation in his life. So I kind of invested, and I wrote about him. So now it's days later, it's pages later, and Rainier by now has fixed his boat, and he's left the doctor behind in this little town. But I kind of think, and I'm not sure, but I think that somehow that heartbroken Canadian general practitioner is going to show up again. I think he's got unfinished business. So we'll see. Or maybe now that I've talked about it, he'll just vanish forever. This is unpredictable. But just the fact that I don't know allows for a certain delight in the work. So I'm having enormous fun, partly because I don't know how it's all going to turn out.
Yeah. No, I love that idea that it is not knowing that keeps you going. That uncertainty, and leaving open the possibility that you're going to be as surprised as anybody else by this process.
Right, exactly.
So important. That
That really makes it fun. That's why a person does it, I think. Is just to see what happens. We're hardwired for that. We want to see what happens.
Yeah. I won't start writing a story without an outline, and the outline is almost never, turns out to be right.
Yeah, I think, yes. Yeah, I know the feelings.
Yeah.
What are you working on now, Jonathan?
Well, I am working very slowly on a sequel to my last novel. It's called The Charlatan's Boy, and I'm slogging. It may be overstating the case a little bit. I'm just going very slowly on a sequel to that book.
Is it difficult to go back to characters you have written about before?
As it turns out, yes. In this case, there's been enough of I guess maybe I keep considering the possibility that The Charlatan's Boy was the whole story, and maybe it doesn't, require a sequel.
I mean, did you write the novel thinking there would be a sequel?
Yes and no. I wrote the novel with a 2-book contract, right? And so the considerations were more contractual than narrative in terms of,
right.
I was working from the assumption there was going to be a sequel, and then I got to the end and thought, this is interesting. This kind of feels like this may be the end of this story. And the truth is, I'm thinking of the sequel in many ways as just another story about the same people, which is not exactly the same thing as a sequel.
That isn't the same thing as a sequel, but it is. I mean, there's something comforting about welcoming an old character or sliding back into a world that you knew from your earlier work. That is a very attractive thing for me. And I'm writing another Lake Superior novel, and I find the same thing. It's like, man, I feel at home in this setting. And it's very freeing. I mean, there's a lot of scene setting you don't necessarily have to do. And you can close your eyes and smell that air, and know where you are. It's lovely. Do you come up with a lot of ideas and are faced with choosing the best one, or do you come up with ideas quite rarely, and so you have to seize onto them and do the best you can?
B. I feel like in terms of stories, I come up with ideas pretty rarely.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's how it is for me too. It's like a story appears when it has to. If I've been unproductive for too long, it's like you open a drawer and there's one story in there. And what are you gonna do with that one story? Do the best you can. People say, "Why did you write that story now?" Because it was the only one there.
Right.
I would love to be one of these writers who are. I remember years ago reading an interview with John Grisham, and it was after The Firm came out, his first just gigantic bestseller. And he said, "Yeah, well, I had 6 or 8 other really terrific ideas after that, and I sat down with my agent, and we figured out which one was going to be the best and the most commercial." And I thought, "Wow,
yeah, I can't imagine
like that."
Yeah,
amazing. I was deeply impressed.
Yeah,
not that way for me.
I read an interview in the New York Times about John Grisham, and this little anecdote just made me love him. He went to this, he had gone to New York for some reason, I guess to meet with his agent or whatever, and so he sat down for the interview with this reporter, and they went to some sort of fancy restaurant in New York City, and he ordered. He said, "I'll have, gnocchi and some other kind of pasta, And the guy says, it's kind of in a high-handed way, said, "You realize that's 2 different kinds of pasta, don't you?" He's like, "Yep, I want 2 different kinds of pasta." And for some reason, I just love. They just like, I want what I want, I'm
that's
not
wonderful.
I'm not nuts about his books. I mean, they're just kind of not my thing, but I'm like, this is a guy who knows what to do with his success. He's also, coaching Little League and just being a member of his community and eating whatever he wants at the fancy restaurant in New York City because
that's very lovable. I'm just in favor of successful writers. I want them to keep doing what they're doing. Every time I get a chance to listen to an interview with Stephen King, I take that chance because I want to know what he's thinking.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, you were asking the question of story ideas. Do you? I find that it's easy to come up with situations. Like I can always think of an interesting situation that might be a story, but very few of those situations turn into actual stories with a plot and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you experience that in a similar way.
Situations are the hard part for me.
Yeah.
For me, the thing that comes first is usually a character who is in some sort of a jam.
Mm-hmm.
And once I have usually a dude in a jam, then I figure the rest will show up.
Yeah.
And then once a dude in a jam has a particular place, then I'm almost
there.
But situations are the jam is part of it, but there's always more.
Yeah.
And then it's just sort of letting them put their shoulder down and barrel through whatever they have to, and who do they meet on the way, and how does that person affect them, and who do they fall in love with, and one thing I love to do, I bet you do this too. If I don't know a character very well, I'll just sit down and write longhand for 7 or 8 pages of just dialogue in which they're talking with different people, so you start to understand their voice. Just let them talk for a while, and then they sort of tell you what they're interested in and what they're afraid of, what their high hopes are, how they've been disappointed, what's the difference between what they wanted out of life and what they got.
That's a great question to ask, by the way, for building a character. What's that gap?
It really is,
and what they got. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what are their disappointments?
That'd be a great question just to ask people in general. You mentioned you've been having kind of shallow conversations with your neighbors. Why don't you just start asking, hey, so what's the difference in what you expected and what you got?
Yeah, well, mostly because I just don't want to be a jerk. But I always think, because people are so interesting. And once in a while, you find somebody who is totally open to that kind of question, and then you can jump in and go for it.
Yeah.
But you don't want to just ambush people with something like that. I remember one time as a kid, maybe high school, I went to this Bible study. There were a lot of people there. I didn't know any of them really, except a few friends. But there were a bunch of older people. I was 15 or so, and most of the people there were adults. And somebody brought me in to meet this young guy who was like a divinity student.
Yeah.
And they said, "You got to listen to this guy. He's something special." And they sort of brought me into this circle, and I said, "Hi, I'm Leif." He's like, "Hey, I'm Dan." I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
And he said, his first question to me was, "Is there a way you could serve God better than the way you're serving him right now?" And I thought, "You jerk. You can't ask me that question. You don't even know me." Now I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
He was clearly there kind of upholding his reputation as a provocateur. And he was a good one. I'd love to talk to him now and see what in the world he's done with his life.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be that guy.
Right. Okay. All right. You talked me out of it.
Well, of course, you've got a podcast. And on a podcast, you can ask whatever you want because people are expecting your questions.
So,
do you like podcasting? I've been thinking about it.
Yeah. Tell me about the gap between what you expected out of life and what you've got in life. Can you tell me about that right now?
Of course, I've never thought of that for myself, John.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't think the gap is that great. Because I was taught from a very young age. Look, I was raised in the strictures of Yantaloven, and
what is? I don't know what that is. What is Yantaloven?
Oh, okay, all right. The Yantaloven is a term that was coined by a Danish Norwegian novelist in the 1930s. I think he published a novel in 1936 called "A Fugitive Crosses His Tracks." Okay, great title.
Yeah,
and the premise. The novelist's name is Axel Sandemos, and there's a young man, the hero of the book, who lives in a town called Jante, Jante, and Jante is run by 10 laws. Now, I'm going to totally screw this up because I haven't read the 10 laws in a while. But the first law is something like this. Don't think you can tell us what to do.
Okay.
The second law is, don't think you are smarter than us.
Okay.
The third law is something like, don't laugh at me. So basically, they're all versions of the very same thing, right? And then there's an unspoken, but everyone knows it, 11th law, which is, don't think there aren't a few things we know about you.
Is this Yanta or is it Lake Wobegon? It sounds like the.
Well, no, this is definitely where Wobegon comes from.
Yeah.
I did not know the term Yantaloven until Peace Like a River was published in Oslo in a Norwegian edition, and I went over for that. And I had dinner with my publisher one night, and he said, "Tell me what your parents think of your books and your sort of success as a writer." And I said, "Oh, they're very uneasy about it. It makes them real nervous." I told him about the fact that when Peace Like a River sold, my mom pulled me aside and said, "Hoping it will sell for just enough money to pay off your mortgage and not a penny more."
Wow.
She said, "That's what I'm praying for." I said, "Don't pray for that, Mom. Pray that it sells for $1 million. What are you doing? Don't sabotage me. God answers your prayers. Don't do that to me." But I realized that, so I told my Norwegian publisher about this, and he burst into laughter, and he said, "Yantaloven, you know about Yantaloven." I said, "I don't know the term." So he told me about it. And we laughed hard because I realized that absolutely, as a person of Scandinavian stock in the Midwest, I was raised under exactly those laws.
Oh, wow.
and it's fascinating. There are good things about it. Humility is just instilled in you. The first thing I can remember hearing as a kid is the phrase, "Don't be a big wheel." So I think always believing that I didn't have it in me to be a big wheel, I haven't had very many disappointments. Yeah. Everything has been extra. The world is gravy to me.
Yeah.
So no, I guess I don't have many disappointments. But I think a lot of people do, because they are raised to expect bigger things than they get. That's life.
Well, it sounds like Yantaloven would maybe equip a person to be receptive to the givenness of the world, and to be grateful.
So.
And all right. I always end, and it's time for us to bring this thing in for a landing. I always end with the question: who are the writers who make you want to write?
Oh man, there's so many of them. There's so many of them, Jonathan. They're all over the place. The world is littered with writers that make me happy and giddy and envious. So some of these are going to be usual suspects. I made them a little list so I wouldn't forget about it. And, Charles Portis, who we mentioned before, absolutely one of them. Every so often I pull down The Dog of the South just to read that dialogue between Ray Midge and Rio Symes.
It's just incredible. I just read it about 2 weeks ago and was blown away again.
Oh, it's just hilarious. I mean, you laugh so hard you startled the neighbors.
Yeah.
Or that part in True Grit where they're tracking down Tom Chaney and they lose half a day throwing corn dodgers in the air and shooting at him with pistols. It's just fantastic. Another guy is Walker Percy. I love Walker Percy.
Yeah.
Who wrote The Moviegoer and a handful of other kind of luminous books. And I think he demonstrated better than almost anybody the sort of absurdity and innate humor that go along with being like a person of faith.
Yeah.
You subscribe to this divine idea, but you're also a corporeal being who gets hungry and horny and drunk.
You're a dog in a tuxedo.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's funny and honest with himself and generous,
Oh, I love him.
Or Jim Harrison, he's another one. Guy who writes with all this kind of specificity and
I don't know Jim
fearlessness.
Harrison.
Oh, goodness. Jim Harrison, he's famous for Legends of the Fall.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Which is, it's maybe one of the best 90-page stories that's ever been written. Every time I read one of his Brown Dog stories, he wrote a bunch of novellas about a guy named Brown Dog in Michigan. I think about that character for days afterward. He's got this appreciation of beauty and good food and, grassland and rivers and open water. And he's got this wonderful skepticism toward, the authoritarian impulse in government and religion, and all of that is just, it's air in your lungs,
All right.
But it's a long list. Nick Hornby makes me want to write.
Yeah.
Mary Oliver makes me want to write. Who's that woman that wrote News of the World? Paulette
Pruitt. Oh no.
No, that Shipping News, her too.
Oh yeah.
Paulette Giles.
Okay.
That's it. News of the World. Martin Amis makes me want to write. And George Saunders, who's like this incredibly generous writer. I love the way he thinks about people. And Louise Erdrich and Michael Chabon and Mario Vargas Llosa and Ann Patchett. I mean, we're just drowning in good stuff, Jonathan.
Oh, it's an embarrassment of riches.
It is. Sometimes I pick up my brother Len's novel, The High Divide. I don't know if you've read that.
I have not.
But it's this epic family and ambition and violence and the last buffalo on the Great Plains in the 19th century. It's the whole package. And sometimes it just makes me laugh to think that Len and I have both gotten to be part of this tradition of, writing and reading and publishing, stretching back to antiquity. I mean, how lucky are we?
Well, Leif Enger, I'm going to tell you, you make me want to write. I just love what you do, and I'm so thrilled to hear that you're in the middle of another novel. I hope you knock that thing out, and I can read it soon.
All right, I'm going to do my best. Thank you so much. This has really been fun.
Yeah, thanks for being on the Habit Podcast, Leif.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.